It's Tuesday, October 7th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, can Trump send troops anywhere? I'm going to talk about the troops that Trump tried to send to Portland, Oregon, and the ones he's trying to send to Chicago now. I'm going to explain how that all happened and whether or not Trump really can send troops into whatever city he likes. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show, whatever app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got some really exciting things about to roll out in the next few weeks that you do not want to miss. You can subscribe for free, or if you want access to a ton of more in-depth reporting I do each week, it's just $5 a month. All right, let's get to the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Distill Union. Founded in 2011, Distill Union crafts everyday essentials like wallets, key organizers, phone cases, and stands, believing that less is more makes good design. They've earned a reputation for creating problem-solving products that are both intuitive and elegant. I like their flagship Wally wallet because, there's nothing worse than having that bulky wallet that sits in your back pocket for guys specifically. It's bad for my back. I can feel it after I've been sitting, especially on the chair that I use to record in here. It's not exactly the most comfortable chair, and if I've got my wallet on me, it's uncomfortable if it's not slim and elegant like their Wally wallets. But they're known for their magnetic closures and that slim profile to hold all of my cards and cash. I love them. And they just launched a Kickstarter for brand new Maglock belts. I don't know exactly what that means, but it kind of sounds cool as hell. Anyway, Distill Union's problem-solving accessories are made from premium materials like full-grain leather that ages beautifully over time, ensuring durability and style. Backed by a 3-year warranty, their products are built to last and engineered for everyday ease, offering the perfect balance of practicality and sophistication. And right now, when you use the code MIMS25, that's MIMS25, you'll get 20% off your entire order. And Make It Make Sense does get a cut of that sale, but hey, it keeps the show going, keeps you in style. What's not to love? You can check out DistillUnion.com for all their great products. That's DISTIL Union.com. Distill Union, where good design is good for you. All right, let's get back to the show. Over the weekend, the White House announced it would be sending between 200 to 300 National Guard troops from Texas to Chicago. And as I'm recording here, those troops have arrived at a military base about an hour south of Chicago to stage. Now, this threat to send in troops to Chicago specifically is one that Trump has been making for a few weeks, but the reasons about why have differed. First, he said it was because crime was out of control in the city, except that's not true. A CBS News analysis of crime numbers for Chicago showed that murders are down 32% from last year, shootings are down 37% from 2024, and 57% from 2021. Car thefts and burglaries were down by double digits, and carjackings were nearly cut in half. Then he said it was because Chicago is allowing quote-unquote lawless, undocumented immigrants to run rampant across the city, and that's because Chicago is what's called a sanctuary city. He said it was getting in the way of the federal government from carrying out its immigration policies. So if you don't know what a sanctuary city is, it's a city that doesn't work with the federal government to carry out a federal policy, which courts have ruled isn't getting in the way of what the feds are doing. Now, most often we hear this when it comes to cities or counties not wanting to help the federal government carry out immigration policies like raids. Mostly these cities do this not because they love criminals, like Trump says, but because it's actually making their cities safer, because immigrants of all statuses in sanctuary cities are more likely to work with police when crimes happen because they aren't afraid of being thrown in jail or deported. There's also decades of court rulings that say while the federal government can set policies, they aren't allowed to force local or state governments to cooperate. And hang with me here because I'm going to give some legal context for this that's going to seem a little wordy. So there was a huge case called Arizona v. United States in 2012. So under the Obama administration, that was ramping up deportations. And that case said that states don't have to work with the federal government on immigration enforcement unless the federal government can prove the state is actively getting in the way of the feds. And another case from 2021, again under a Democratic president in Joe Biden out of New Jersey, said that simply not doing anything to help the federal government isn't the same as putting up roadblocks. Those cases mean that the idea that these cities are blocking the federal government doesn't actually hold any water, which brings us to the latest reason that Trump thinks he can send troops into Chicago, and it's because he says a rebellion is happening. For the last few weeks, armed, masked, and uniformed ICE agents have been patrolling the streets of Chicago, and by accounts from people who live there, they've essentially just been there to terrorize those neighborhoods. Now, last week, a group of ICE agents raided an apartment complex, arresting 37 people, many of them U.S. citizens, including children, some of whom were naked and zip-tied together before being let out and then thrown to the back of ICE vans. One witness told reporters when she said out loud, "Where is the humanity in this?" a nearby ICE agent replied, "Fuck them kids." Now, in that raid, a ton of damage was done to the building and the apartments, and it turned out that ICE agents just went in there just to see what they could find, instead of it being a targeted raid looking for someone. Also at this time, a CBS Chicago reporter was targeted by ICE agents with pepper balls from a shotgun. Her news car was hit, and the fumes from those chemicals caused her to vomit at least once. She said she wasn't in an area where there were protesters around, and she felt like she was specifically targeted. And ICE agents outside of the detention facility that is just outside of Chicago, where a lot of the protests have taken place, have made at least one fake 911 call about people tampering with the gate, according to that town's police chief, who said they've also received several similar questionable calls from ICE agents since they've been deployed to the city. And agents have been extremely aggressive with protesters, including throwing them to the ground like they did to a Chicago candidate for Congress who was there protesting. Now, I do need to say that DHS is also claiming that several protesters used their vehicles to block in ICE SUVs, and then one of those drivers then rammed agents, which DHS says forced its agents to open fire on the woman driving that car in what they're calling defensive shots. Now, that's according to a criminal complaint, and the woman who survived being shot has been charged with forcibly assaulting an officer. It's also being reported that those ICE agents who shot her taunted her before she allegedly rammed their vehicle, saying, "Do something, bitch," before shooting. And I think this is a good time here to say that most independent law enforcement experts say it's been ICE's own tactics in the cities around the country that have forced escalations, not protesters or the public. Now, because of the protests in Chicago and that incident, Trump is calling this a rebellion. The state of Illinois and the city of Chicago have already sued over that. Likewise, with states like Oregon and California that have brought troop deployments to court already this year. And I'm going to come back to the Chicago case because this is a good time here to jump to Portland. So, really quick, a few weeks ago, Trump sent ICE agents into Portland because it appears he'd been watching footage from violent protests in 2020, 5 years ago, that were being replayed on TV as a part of the coverage of much smaller ICE protests that were really happening this year. Now, that spurred Trump to send in agents and then try to send in the National Guard under the idea that a rebellion was happening in Portland. His supporters specifically pointing to a video from back in June of ICE agents pushing back about a dozen or so protesters who had cardboard signs and plastic bin lids they were using as shields by aiming guns at them and then shooting tear gas canisters and flashbangs into that crowd. Again, ICE's own tactics escalating that situation. So, Trump tried to order 200 or so California National Guard troops into Portland, and the state of Oregon and the city of Portland sued. The state of California also joined that lawsuit. And if you remember, when California sued over Trump sending Marines and federalizing the California Guard earlier this year, saying it was illegal to send troops into LA when neither the state nor city requested it, a judge agreed. But the White House is leaning on two things they say allows them to federalize troops. The first is a memo that was sent out in June, essentially giving the White House and the Department of Defense wide-ranging powers to federalize National Guard troops under the idea of an ongoing emergency in those states over immigration. They're also leaning on a very specific little-used law that's called 10 U.S.C. 12406. Now, it's not important that you remember that. What is important is that this law says the president can federalize the National Guard of any state if one of three things happens. If the U.S. is under invasion from a foreign nation, if there's a rebellion or danger of rebellion against the U.S. government, or if the president is unable to use regular law enforcement to execute laws. Now, the judge in California said clearly ICE was able to make a ton of arrests, so that third thing wasn't happening, and the first two things definitely weren't happening. And in Portland, a judge said she didn't find any evidence of rebellion, saying, while the government did show evidence of sporadic violence against federal officers and property damage to a federal building, she described the protests since July as largely sedate and said the administration failed to offer any evidence, quote, demonstrating that those violent incidents were part of an organized attempt to overthrow the government as a whole. She also said this, which was pretty scathing for judge speak. She said this country has a long-standing and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs. This historical tradition boils down to a simple proposition. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. So she blocked troops from heading to Portland for now. That block ends on the 18th. The ruling is also being appealed by the administration, which said that judge overstepped her authority. Now, California, like I said, joined that lawsuit because the state didn't authorize its National Guard to be federalized, and that brings us back to Chicago. Because the troops that are set to go into the Windy City are from Texas, and Texas has given the Trump administration permission to use its troops. Here's Texas Governor Greg Abbott explaining why on Fox News.
Well, listen, Sean, it's the same thing all over again, just in a different wrapper. What happened under the Biden administration is the Biden administration refused to enforce the law, and it led to chaos. Now we have these local states that are refusing to enforce the law, and we have chaos. Know this, and that is the president has the constitutional responsibility to enforce the laws of the United States, and those laws include the immigration laws. And the president has the authority to call up National Guard to assist in enforcing those laws. And that's exactly what the president is doing, and what Texas is doing. We're assisting the president in that cause.
Okay, so despite what Abbott is saying there, courts have found that these places weren't in chaos until ICE agents got there. And like I said at the very beginning, while yes, the president has a duty to carry out laws, states have no obligation to help him do that, especially when it comes to immigration. And that gets us to the lawsuit that was filed by Chicago and Illinois on Monday. A judge in the state of Illinois is letting those troops be deployed in Chicago for now, even though she said she was, quote, very troubled by the lack of answers from the federal government about why they thought troops were necessary. Arguments in that case are set for Thursday, but with troops already in the Chicago area staging and those arguments only a couple days away, any ruling that might come after that might come too late. And before I end the episode, because I know this has been kind of a dense one, there are two takeaways here. First, what we're really seeing here is the outcome of a Supreme Court ruling from over the summer that said judges are no longer allowed to issue nationwide rulings. You see, before June, a federal judge, say that judge in California or in Portland, would have been able to issue a national ban on sending troops from other states into cities that don't want them there or from states that didn't authorize it until their case was over. Those were called national injunctions, and they were meant to stop someone, in this case the Trump administration, from using the same legal logic in different jurisdictions that could make for wildly different sets of rules in different places across the country. Basically, the presidential equivalent of a kid going to one parent, not getting the answer they like, so they go to a different parent to try again. And it's exactly what we're seeing right now, and it makes for a really chaotic and less unified United States. Secondly, and finally, despite the court cases and the raids, the administration is telling us that none of this actually has anything to do with immigration or violence. In his speech last week to military generals, Trump described democratically run cities as threats within. And Stephen Miller, maybe the second most powerful person in the White House right now and Trump's chief architect of all things immigration, said this on CNN.
If a Democratic president someday calls the National Guard to a red state over what they see as open rebellion, but is what amounts to a demonstration that gets rowdy. I mean, is that not a fear of yours?
And they're posting pictures of their kids because it's a demonstration, and they have a sniper on top of a building firing a high-caliber rifle at a nice facility because it's a demonstration, and they are engaging in vehicle ramming attacks.
But the National Guard isn't being sent to Texas.
Because it's a
the National Guard
demonstration.
isn't being sent to Dallas, where that sniper was.
Because the Dallas Police Department and the governor of Texas, well, you walked right into that one, have responded to every call for assistance and help. They gave a stand-up.
First of all, God, this dude sucks. Second, he said the quiet part out loud there. They're not targeting places like Texas, where there was an actual attack on an ICE facility and targeting ICE officers, according to the FBI, because Texas has helped the Trump administration target Democrats every time it's asked. And if the point of federalizing National Guard troops is to keep federal agents safe, you'd expect them to be in a place like Dallas. But instead, they're targeting places where their political enemies are. It's what it has always been about. But the problem is, it's based on what courts have found to be flimsy logic. And if it doesn't stop, things could escalate to a point that we can't walk back from. All right, that is it for today's show. Please rate and review on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack for free, or if you want to become a paid member to help support the show, it's just $5 a month. As always, share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you on Friday.